Welcome to this overview session of the Level 5 Diploma in Education and Training. My name is Christina. I am a member of the faculty team with the UK Group of Education. The purpose of the Level 5 Diploma in Education and Training is to give you the knowledge, understanding and skills that you need in order to confirm occupational competence. This diploma will include the planning and delivering of schemes of work and training sessions, negotiation of individual learning goals. It will also include different teaching and learning strategies that we are going to cover. We'll also focus on certain communication issues and how to utilize a range of assessment practices in order for you to further develop within your field as an education and training practitioner. There will be not only mandatory units, but also optional units, and they will serve the purpose of helping you explore areas that are directly relevant to your own teaching role. So apart from mandatory units, there will also be optional units and the opportunity to practice. Now, let's have a look at some of the units that we are going to be covering during this diploma. Actually, we're going to have a look at all of the units, and then we will focus on each unit individually so that you can find out what exactly the unit will cover. Whilst we do not have that much time today to cover the units in detail, you will gain a really good overview of some of the key elements of content that we will be covering as a part of the individual units. Okay, so in order to qualify, there will be 4 mandatory units as I just shared, and also optional units which are 8 in total, and you have the opportunity to select the optional units that you would like to attend, and there will be a total of 120 credits that you would need to obtain in order to achieve the Level 5 Diploma in Education and Training. 75 of these credits will be achieved from the 4 mandatory units, and a total of 45 credits will be achieved from the optional units. Now we're going to go into the mandatory units so that you can have a look at what these units are. They are teaching, learning and assessment in education and training, theories, principles and models in education and training. So the first mandatory unit is very much an introduction into the diploma, into the subject of the diploma. The second unit is going to be very theoretical, where there will be a lot of models, different principles and theories that we're going to be looking at. And the third mandatory unit, which is developing teaching, learning and assessment in education and training, is a practical one. We will not only be looking at some of the theories and models that we learned during unit 2, but we are also going to be applying them. So you will have the opportunity to plan and facilitate a training session, as well as to evaluate it, which is part of this diploma, which is very exciting because once you learn the theories, you have the opportunity to practice there and then and receive valuable feedback. Now, the fourth mandatory unit is wider professional practice in education and training. Okay, so these are the 4 core mandatory units, and you will have to attend and pass the assessment criteria for all of them. Now, let's have a look at the optional units. There are 8 in total. The very first unit is develop and prepare resources for learning and development. The actual title of the unit is very self-explanatory, as we will be developing and preparing resources. We will look into what resources we can use, but you will have the opportunity to learn more about what we are going to be covering during each unit further down the line during this session. Okay, so that is the very first one, and it constitutes as 6 credits. The second unit is Develop Learning and Development Programs. During this unit, we are going to be looking at the design and development of learning and development interventions and sessions. Then we're going to move to Equality and Diversity. And I am actually talking to you as if you would have all the optional units. You attend all of them, but again, remember, you have the opportunity to choose. So this is just a very brief summary, and then you can select which optional unit you want to cover, okay? So Equality and Diversity is a very interesting one because we are going to be looking at some of the legislation introduced in the United Kingdom which relates to equality and diversity, and you also be asked to do some research about key legislation from your own country, depending on where you're joining us from and also depending on whether you'd like to take this unit. The fourth optional unit is Evaluating Learning Programs, constitutes as 3 credits. Again, the title is very self-explanatory, and this unit will involve learning how to evaluate the learning programs that you have delivered. And the fifth unit is Identify the learning needs of an organization. Okay, so during this unit we are going to look into the process of learning needs analysis and how to conduct learning needs analysis. This unit is quite an important unit to those of you who are looking into going into the role of a trainer, for instance, within a corporate organization or any organization really. So if you're looking into going into training and development, this module is quite an essential one, and it could prepare you into conducting learning needs analysis in your own organization or whenever you take on the opportunity as a role of a trainer. Okay, and the sixth module is Manage Learning and Development in Groups, and the seventh module is Understanding and Managing Behaviors in a Learning Environment. So Unit 6 and Unit 7, they are kind of on a related subject because during Manage Learning and Development in Groups, we are going to focus on group dynamics, some of the factors that affect the learning environment. And during the seventh module, the seventh unit, Understanding and Managing Behaviors in a Learning Environment, we're actually going to focus on how to manage some of the behaviors that we as practitioners might face when we are teaching or delivering training. And then the final module, which constitutes as 15 credits, is Action Research. During Action Research, I keep using the word unit and module. For the purpose of this qualification, we refer to the various subjects as units, so please apologies if I use these words module and unit interchangeably. Let me correct myself, unit. So for the final unit, which is optional unit 8, Action Research, we are going to focus on how to conduct research that allows us to improve ourselves as practitioners within those fields, and also how to further improve our training programs as well. So again, these are the 8 optional units, and you need to pick a few of those and ensure that you receive 45 credits in total. Okay, right. So now we've had a look and kind of summarized what the diploma includes in terms of units. Now we're going to start going into the units in more detail. And the very first unit that we're going to cover an overview of is Mandatory Unit 1, Teaching, Learning and Assessment in Education and Training. Now, the aim of this unit is to provide you with knowledge, understanding and skills that relate to teaching, learning and assessment in the education and training sector. It also will give you an understanding of the role and responsibilities of a teacher and trainer, and how to set individual learning goals, as well as how to plan, deliver, and assess inclusive teaching and learning sessions or programs. It will also help you learn how to maintain an inclusive learning environment and how to evaluate your own practice as a teaching or training practitioner. Okay, so this is the introductory unit. During this unit, we are going to start by looking at what is teaching, okay, and how it differs from training. So the teaching as a process involves the transmission of information that then becomes knowledge. We are going to look at the various definitions of teaching, and I've picked one of them here, which is from the International Bureau of Education, where they view teaching as a tool that supports the process of learners' knowledge construction and understanding, building on what is already known by the learner and involving a learner-centered approach. So we're going to go deeper into the concept of teaching and also how it differs from training. Now, there are many definitions of training, but the mainstream definition I have actually taken from the dictionary, and that is from the Collins Dictionary actually. So training is the process of learning the skills that you need for a particular job. In a nutshell, this is just a very basic definition, and during the actual unit we are going to go into more detail as to the differences between teaching and training. Whilst they kind of overlap, teaching tends to have more of an abstract and theoretical approach when it comes to delivering information that then becomes knowledge, where training can be practical as well. Training can involve doing, and teaching involves understanding, where we are ensuring that the students are acquiring the necessary knowledge and they understand how to apply, they learn it. So we're not going to go into too much detail into the difference between teaching and training here, but I wanted to give you a bit of an overview as to what we're going to be doing during the unit when it comes to these two different concepts and methods of facilitation, okay? Depending on which field you are looking into entering when it comes to your professional life, whether you'd like to become a teacher or a trainer, we're going to be looking into both professions. And then we're going to look at diagnostic assessment. We're going to look into the definition of a diagnostic assessment. And for the purpose of this overview session, I have picked a definition again from the International Bureau of Education, which defines diagnostic assessment as an assessment aimed at identifying a learner's strengths and weaknesses with a view to taking necessary action to enhance learning. This type of assessment, diagnostic assessment, is used prior to the teaching and learning process to appraise the learner's readiness or level of achievement. Okay, so it is very important that we understand what diagnostic assessment is, because it will be required of you that you conduct diagnostic assessment as a part of this diploma in practical terms, okay? Diagnostic assessment informs both the teacher and the learner of their current abilities and what they need to learn in the future. Again, this is just an overview, but during the actual unit, we are going to go into more detail so that you feel confident in conducting diagnostic assessment. As diagnostic assessments can be used both in a teaching role, where you are perhaps a teacher in a primary school, but it can also be used in a more of a professional context as well. So these are some of the ways you can use diagnostic assessment in order to identify learning goals in teaching. So informal ways of diagnostic assessments are teacher-made tests, quizzes, surveys, and also we've got diagnostic reading assessment that is conducted specifically in order for literacy behaviors to be assessed. Okay, so perhaps if a student has learning or reading difficulties, then we could use diagnostic reading assessment to assess the level of competency within the literacy field. Literacy competency. Okay, so these are some of the ways we could use diagnostic assessment when it comes to teaching. And when it comes to using diagnostic assessment in a professional context, that could be conducted in the workplace in the form of a questionnaire, for instance, or in the form of a test. And it is usually done so that the employee's level of literacy, language, and numeracy skills can be identified. Okay, and this is when the learning goals are identified together with the in accordance with the employee's skills, with the employee's literacy, language, or numeracy skills, depending on obviously what we are assessing when we are using a diagnostic assessment. So that could also be done in a professional context. And some companies use diagnostic assessment at the very beginning as a part of the onboarding process as well. And if an employee, for instance, in a form where they complete their personal details, they're asked whether they would require any specific adjustment when it comes to whether they have any specific learning needs in relationship with to literacy or language or even numeracy. Okay, and then if they say that perhaps they are dyslexic, then us teaching and training practitioners and also us employers, we then need to evaluate their level so that we can ensure that they are first fit to do the role, but also they are supported. And this is where diagnostic assessment can come in handy so that the level can be assessed. I'm not going to go into too much detail in here, but during the actual unit we are going to look into that as well. And we are also going to look into the concept of inclusive teaching and learning. We will look into how we can plan inclusive teaching and learning, okay? So that involves designing inclusive teaching and learning plans and taking into consideration compliance requirements that we as practitioners must be following when we plan teaching and learning activities and sessions. The Equality Act 2010 is introduced by the government here in the UK. It was updated in 2010 and actually relates to a number of protected personal characteristics which help people feel that they're included in the workplace and they're not discriminated against on the basis of those protected personal characteristics. So I'm not going to say too much about this at the moment because we're going to look at the Equality Act later on, but when we are designing plans of teaching, lesson plans, and also when we are designing the activities for the actual session, in order for us to create an inclusive and safe learning environment, we must be aware of some of the key requirements that governments have introduced, and also not only external bodies like governments, but we also need to think of what the different policies of the organization are as well. Okay, so we'll also discuss approaches to obtaining learners' feedback to help us create inclusive teaching and planning. As usually, when you facilitate a session, towards the end of the session, when the session is already finished, you could involve the learners in the evaluation process, because they will give you feedback as to how you performed or any questions that are relevant and you may want to ask. So we are going to cover all of this in Unit 1. We're also going to look into how we can assess learning and training. We will look into the different types of assessment. We're going to look at summative assessment, that is used when we assess the achievement of a learner, typically towards the end of a term or in the end of a course or a training program. So we're going to look into methods of summative assessment that you could use when we get to the practical stage of this level 5 of this diploma. And we are also going to look at formative assessment. So these are the two types of assessment that you will be using in your role as a teacher or training practitioner. And formative assessment is used mostly as an ongoing assessment tool. So it is used throughout the educational process, and that involves the teacher providing regular or the trainer providing regular feedback, involving the students in the assessment, the learning process, where the summative assessment is more of an assessment that we use once a learning cycle or a learning program is completed. Okay, so again, just kind of a brief overview here, and during the actual sessions that are part of Unit 1, we will then have a look at those types of assessments in much greater detail. Okay? Now, of course, we are also going to look at methods of assessment. So here we have a list of a few of the methods that you could be using. I decided to include that here in the overview session as well, so that you know what we are going to be covering during the actual sessions. We will learn how to conduct observation, how to observe group work activities, especially if we are entering the field of corporate training, for instance, or want to become a trainer, learning and development practitioner in a kind of a corporate/professional context. We'll also look into how we can use multiple choice questions as a method of assessment, case studies as well, depending on what competencies we are assessing, and role plays. Role plays can be used during assessment centers, for instance. So if, let's say, someone is applying for a leadership role, and the leadership role would involve them managing a big team, and managing that team would involve delivering performance reviews, then during a typical assessment center, there could be a role play where they are asked to actually conduct an appraisal, and then there is an observer who is present, and then they are assessing the employee, whether they're a good fit for the role. Or role play assessment can also be used when an employee is being promoted to, perhaps if they're in a line level role, they are being promoted to a leadership role, again, change of responsibilities. So this is where we could use, us training and development practitioners who are facilitating the assessment center or taking part, this is where we could use role plays as methods of assessment. There are multiple methods that could be used, and we always must keep the learning objectives in mind when we are choosing the appropriate methods in order for us to assess the level of learning that has taken place as a result of attending a training course, or even if they're a good fit for the role, for instance, if we are involved into helping them as trainers reach the next level within the organization. At the actual session, which is part of this unit, there will be a few sessions, but some of the sessions are going to involve us looking at real life scenarios where you will get to know how these methods are used in a kind of a real life scenario. You also have the opportunity to select methods when you are assessing your own training sessions that you will be delivering as a part of achieving this qualification. Okay. Now, we are going to be focusing on you as practitioners as well, and on your own training or teaching practice. We are going to be introducing the concept of continuous professional development, CPD. Some of you may be already familiar with the concept of CPD. It is widely used within the education and training profession, and it involves self-assessment, reflection on your performance that allows you to become more effective as a practitioner within your field. We are going to be looking at some of the different practices that we could be using as practitioners within the education and training sector that could support you in improving your performance and also developing within the field, reaching the next level in your profession as well. So there are different means, there are different ways that different practices that could be used, and we are going to go into detail as to which practices you could be using individually based on your own goals and what you aim to achieve following completing the qualification, whether you would like to go into the world of teaching, into the world of training, and so on. So the interesting, well, unit 1 is a great introduction into the subject, but the good thing about it is that it also focuses on reflecting on your own practice as a practitioner as well. So there is an element of thinking about how you can reflect on your own performance, and of course how you can create an action plan so that you can continuously improve it as well. Right.